This is a French Cleat video, and in it we're going to tackle two major problems with tool storage. And I'm going to show you lots of ways to upgrade the cleats you've already got in place. The first of the two tools we're going to focus on today is your saw, but not just one, all your saws. And don't get me wrong, the French Cleat hook has been serving me really well for the last couple of months, but this is inefficient. And on top of that, you'll remember the chisel holder from the first video. There's no chisels in it. The reason for that is, as each and every one of you pointed out, it has a fatal flaw. So we're going to replace it with what I think is the coolest French Cleat that I've made to date. And I'll give you a very quick sneak peek because I think you're going to enjoy this one. I'll show you how to make it in a second. There are two philosophies from the first video that we are going to be sticking tightly to. Number one, the tools closest to you should be the most used. And number two, take a look down your storage wall, look at which item sticks out the furthest, and that creates a box instead of just a flat wall panel. It increases your space exponentially, and in my opinion, puts French Cleat way above the lowly pegboard. Let's dive straight into the first one. This is a French Cleat on a French Cleat. By that I mean it's not actually on the French Cleat wall, it's hanging off the side of the plane till. You'll have seen this in loads of videos. It works on a dowel and gravity system using friction, and it holds all your saws in place. But for people like me in a small workshop, this just won't cut it. I'll show you how I made mine, which fits in more saws in a much smaller space and is far more efficient. So let's dive into the anatomy of this first, because there's an elegant simplicity to it that means anybody watching this could make it. All it consists of for each one of the saws you're going to place through the front here is a perpendicular 90-degree piece of wood and then one set at 22.5 degrees to give the gravity that the dowel needs to fall back on the saw. If you place the saw up through the gap, you can see the dowel rolls out of the way, and then when you let go of the saw and gravity pulls it downwards, the dowel rolls into the groove and wedges against the saw, pushing it against the upright. And it holds it in place. There's two things that I did to my dowels. One, I wrapped in cork, and the other one I wrapped in rubber matting, the draw liner kind of stuff. Both of which really added to the grip and made it so much more effective. Now, one of the biggest reasons that this rack is as big as it is because of these dowels. These dowels are just too wide. They give you good surface area, but they take up a lot of space. This is the smallest dowel I have, and as you can see, it takes up a lot less space. However, due to the lack of surface area against the blade, that is just not going to cut it. But I've had an idea. I've got myself some of this. Some silicone piping that the dowel can sit in snugly, and then I can cut these to length, and I reckon that extra grip is going to do the job, and we can save a huge amount of space. Now, the one thing I did need to do in order to make this snug so the dowel didn't slip around was just wrap a layer of blue tape around it before putting it in, and that just held it all really snug. I want to show you why this won't work on my wall. Most people will have it sideways, and then when they put their saw in, the depth of it is taking up a huge amount of space on the wall, so then your square footage of wall space needed for this is huge. And this is just for 5 saws. What we talked about right at the start of this video I think is vitally important right now. There are items such as the sanding rack that stick out about 1/2 foot. So anything that is not utilised out to that depth is wasted space. So in a perfect world, I would want this coming out this way, because that's going to take up less space. It's going to be more efficient. You're only using a few inches of width, and you're using the same depth as you would for one saw, and you're going to have all your saws lined up. However, that sticks out a little bit too far. So what we need to get past is how do we fit all of this in to a much smaller footprint. But before we dive in and start making an entire holder, let's just check that my theory holds, that little dowel is going to do its job. I made a right mess setting up this little prototype. All I've done is screwed it together just to see if the concept works. Feed the saw up and it bites. Now, that's really quite sturdy. But is there enough of a space saving? If we measure this, the entirety of one piece is going to be taken up by 50 mil. So if we've got 5 that we want to put into this saw till, we are going to go for 250 mil in full length. This is 50 mil too much, but we are still going to build it. We just have to make sure that there is no wasted space. And I'm also going to keep the original saw till because, do you know what? I think I've had an idea for what I can use it for. But more on that later. Let's get started building the new, improved, more efficient version. All I did was strip down a load of 12mm plywood to make all of the different uprights and the angled pieces. And using the table saw allowed me to keep the width exactly the same so that I knew that the whole saw till would sandwich together nice and snug. And then with the stop block set up, I just cut down all the pieces to the same width and made sure I had enough to make more than I needed. Gluing them onto the back of board is easy, just using wood glue for the strength and then a bit of CA glue for the temporary hold to save on clamps, as you'll see later on. And there's a handy way using a speed square of finding 22.5 degrees. So using the speed square, I just struck a line and popped the angle pieces in and then went back in to do the perpendicular piece next to it, making sure that I left enough space for the saws to go up between the angled and the straight, but saving as much space as I could by keeping everything else nice and snug. Now you'll notice here I've only done 3 and I'm already starting to cut the end off. This is because I've got a bit of a clever idea that only dawned on me during the build. Why not have back-to-back saw tills? You'll notice I've put the double blocks in here. You're going to see what they're used for later. It's just for an added bit of stability. But so far, so good. I measured the outside pieces directly from the saw till itself and then took them over to the table saw where I'd struck a line from either side of the saw blade so I know exactly where it's going to cut, and I just used my mitre gauge to cut them all to exactly the same length. No measuring, just taking it from the piece itself. Now a quick test shows that this is working perfectly. The only issue I've got to contend with is the dowels jumping around, and there's a simple solution to that. If you just cut a few tiny blocks and just raise them up maybe 3 or 4 mil above the dowels, they'll keep the dowel in place but they'll allow it to move up and down so that the saws can come in and out. I'm going to see if it actually works and if it is actually going to be a good space saver. So for a start, that is still not as wide as the space you need to leave for the original one. So this is good. This is better. Depth-wise, well, you'd have had the same depth on this as you would on this. The only difference is you're only using it for half the width. There is a lot of wasted space right here. And I think there's something we can do with that. Okay, it's the next day and we're going to start with a couple of confessions. You remember seeing this being just glued together, super glue and wood glue. I had to take it apart and put some screws through the side into the internal pieces, just to give it that extra bit of strength. But apart from that, it is good to go. Now you will have noticed that I've put these saws in a particular order. I've put small ones right at the back as opposed to going for the more frequently used. The reason for that is it draws the ones with the longer handles slightly further forward, meaning if I wanted to, I've got a bit of extra access to the cleat right there. Now here's a tip. This is simplicity, but it will increase the efficiency of your French cleat wall and your storage infinitely. Take a look at everything that's got a flat surface, whether it's the side of a sanding box or the front of a saw till or even a drawer front, and then put magnets everywhere. This one, I'm going to use this one for all my most used bits so it's nice and close to the workbench. And sticking with the theme of tips, anything that's a French cleat holder where you move a tool upwards and there's an element of friction has the possibility of coming off the wall with the tool. We've got to find a way that we're going to lock these onto the cleats, but we can remove those locks really easily. And I think I've got an idea. There's a really easy way of looking at this. If you've got a cleat holder that you take off the wall a lot, these squeeze clamps. So I just take the whole thing off, pop it on my workbench, use them, and then put them back afterwards. If I've got a locking bar on there, it's just going to get annoying. And equally, the same thing can be said for anything you take off the wall that you put on the French cleat on the side of your workbench. If you haven't seen that, I'll show you that in a second. Those things, don't worry about locking them down. What does tend to come off the wall a lot, if you've got them pretty snugly fitted, is your clamp holders. This is the holder and this is the cleat. And when it sits on there, I've purposefully left 2 blocks at the bottom that come out the same distance as the cleats here so that there's stability when you push against the wall, these sit. But what they also give you is a handy little point to put a little tapered locking bar. These locking bars are really simple. They're about 40 mil in length. They start at a taper from a width of 10 mil up to 13. As you slide them in between the cleat and the cleat holder, eventually they lock themselves into place. And what that does is it locks the cleat to the bar at the back. Now, I did find that these had a really snug fit, which is good, but taking them out is less than easy. So I also added a little dowel to them. And now you can slide them in, pull them out, and you can put them on all the cleats you just don't think you're going to move anytime soon. Let's take a second to revisit the old saw till. So I'm going to leave the cleat on the side. What I am going to use it for, same as before, The Shinto rasp's going to live there. I'm also going to put my straight edge in there. 2 brand new speed squares. And this one's massive and it's just been banging around in a drawer. So let's see how this goes, and you'll be surprised how much you bring out a speed square. Because it's in the corner, I'm not too worried about this point sticking out. If it was anywhere else on the cleat wall, I know that that would be the first place I'd hit. But in this corner, short of me running into the corner and hiding, I'm not going to hit it. Let's get on to the most exciting part of this build process. Let's replace this. You guys had 2 problems with this. One, if you're going to store chisels in it, how do you know which ones you've got in there? Because the handles are normally quite similar. And 2, doesn't the bottom blunt the chisel when you keep dropping them in? You're right on both counts. But I'm not throwing these boxes away because they are super handy for glue spreaders, sanding sticks, and different random array of screwdrivers that I use. But they're no good for chisels. So let's make something that is. The first thing that's important is the depth of backerboard. Got to make sure that it is long enough to hold the chisels, but it's not so deep or so shallow that they're not going to sit right. And then once you've done that, decide how many you want on each tier of this holder. I've gone for 3, and I've just left enough gap between them so the handles don't knock. But before you make your cuts, we need to countersink the magnets. And if you're going to use a router like I am here, it's better to do it all as one long piece. It just makes your life easier. And as I didn't find any of my guides, all I've done is just double-sided tape a piece of wood to it to run along the side of the backerboard that will give me a nice even groove. And I've done that twice. And then I looked at my magnets and realised the ones I wanted to use on the top were actually round. And there's a little trick in this. If you want to use a Forstner bit, but you've already grooved out a certain area, so it's just going to slip around, drill a hole through another piece of wood and use that to support the Forstner bit as it goes through. All the magnets are just glued in with a little bit of CA glue. And then once they're all in place, 2 for each chisel, 1 above, 1 below, then I've just cut some strips of 1/4 inch ply, which you're going to see could probably be better as 3/4 inch later on. Then I've just glued them onto the backerboard just to create little houses for each of the chisels. Difficulty now is, if you imagine you're going to come sliding in from the top, the chances are you're going to rub against this magnet here. Now the magnets are slightly recessed, so actually what you're hitting with the chisel is the edge of the wood. Now I'm going to try covering these with just some sticky back felt to see if that solves the issue. Okay, it dawned on me here that actually what I really wanted to do was to put these together, and the handles, if I put them next to each other, are going to bang into each other. So first thing I've done is I've just laser cut some spacers that I'm going to put on top of the dividers. That's an easy fix. You guys don't have to go any further than this. If you want to just put your chisels in and skip over to the next step, go for it. I've had a better idea of what I want to do, and I'm going to put a sheet of Perspex on the top that hopefully is just going to space them a little bit further. It's also going to keep the chisels from falling forwards when they're on the back, just in case the magnet fails, which I'm pretty sure it's not going to. All I've done is I've cut them on the laser. You could cut them by hand, and I've just countersunk some holes. Before we move on to the next bit, I want to level with you. If you're going to screw on the Perspex to the front, don't use an impact driver. Quick test to see that the chisels don't hinder each other. They're pretty close, but not enough, I don't think, that they're going to bash each other. If you're making this the same as me, do your divider straight out 3/4 inch, don't mess around with spacers like I've done, and everything should be fine. Now, I'm going to try and make it so it's a little bit clever. Now I've gone for a hinge on one side of the first 2 and then on the other side of the second and third piece when they've been joined together, so it comes out in a kind of straight line rather than as a book. As you're screwing into the end grain, it's well worth pre-drilling, and these center finding drill bits are unbelievably useful in this scenario. And then the last thing to add is whatever's going to attach it to the cleat. The beauty of this particular holder is you can use these little brackets like I've used, or you could put another batten of the 45-degree cut plywood to link nicely with the backerboard. And I thought the screws through the acrylic front were a mistake. However, they are really handy for attaching magnets to the back of the board in front so that, well, the whole piece holds itself together nicely. And all you need to do is put the magnet on the screw, bit of CA glue on it, and then attach it to the backerboard. Once the glue's gone off, it'll pull it away from the screw and it'll be aligned absolutely perfectly. And like so many of the magnets in my shop, I've put a little bit of sticky back felt on them just to give it a nice soft close feel. I don't mind confessing that I'm a little bit nervous about this one because it went wrong a bit during the process, but my primary reason for doing these things isn't necessarily to create any kind of perfection. I just want to show you guys what's possible with an afternoon and a little bit of scrap wood. Let's see if it actually works, and this is genuinely the first time I've put this up on this wall, just in case. Biggest criticism with the last one was, well, you can't see what's in there. So let's see if this bit works. And this is the bit that worried me. I'm really proud of that. Before we get to the end of this video, let's just take a second to go back to the old sawtill, as I had a little bit of a brainwave. For those of you thinking, could you have made more of that? Well, I got bored this morning and I thought, yeah, actually, I can. So I glued magnets to the front, and now some of my more used tools are within arm's reach. And with that in mind, don't judge me on this, but I glued a magnet to my really nice plane till. Just a plain circular magnet. Do you know why? So I can put a candle on it. Who doesn't need a candle next to their planes? I use cheap tea light candles to wax the underside of my planes. And there's one more magnet that I've put on, but it's not all that important. This was in the last video. This is the every tool cleat holder. This goes onto my bench, onto the cleat on the side of my bench. And I thought, well, what if I want to bring something else with it? Well, there you go. There's now a magnet on the side. And something else that I'm really proud of was gone over in the workbench video. So if you missed that, take a look at a French cleat on the side of your workbench. You see, I've attached my French cleat in a way that it can be run straight into the T-track that's on the side of my workbench. But for years, I just had one screwed on there for my bin and for other French cleat holders, such as the chisel holder. Have a look at this. It doesn't hurt having it on the edge of your workbench for when you're doing a load of bulk sharpening, so you can just keep the chisels in there. You haven't got to lie them down on your workbench. They're not going to get dinged. You want to see more about that? Check out the workbench build. Now I know as we bring this French cleat video to a close again, there are still loads of other things I haven't covered. Hopefully there's some little ideas in there that are going to help you along the way. This is possibly my proudest cleat to this moment, and the simplicity of it is why I love it so much. If you have any questions, or if you want me to do anything else, or you've got some comments, you guys saved my chisel box and made me think of this. And so don't be afraid to let me know exactly what you think, for better or worse. If you didn't see the first French cleat video, it goes over some more of the basic stuff. It's a great place to get started. I'll link it there. If you're new to the channel and you're looking for some other ideas of things to watch, take a look at that one. Thanks for coming along. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you over there.